Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's conversation with the renowned columnist George F. Will on baseball, our national pastime. While you know George Will as a leading expert on national and international affairs, what you may not know until tonight is that he knows just as much about baseball. I'm Wendy Gerber, co-chair of the Princeton Club of New York's Programs Committee and CEO of the International Consulting Group. And I'm very happy to welcome you to tonight's program, which we're co-sponsoring with the Princeton Association of New York City, or PANIC. I really enjoyed my conversation with George in the fall when he shared his tremendous insights about what the November election means. And I look forward to a future discussion with him. But tonight, I'm very excited to hear what I'm sure will be a fascinating talk about baseball, America's national pastime and the sport's enduring impact on our culture and society. Growing up on Long Island, I started out a Mets fan, but joined the ranks of Yankees fans during my Princeton years. Given these roots, I especially loved going to the Subway Series where the Yankees and Mets went head to head. There's a great quote attributed to Mr. Will that I understand is actually true. All I remember about my wedding day in 1967 is that the Cubs lost a doubleheader. Maybe he'll fill us in about that tonight. To moderate tonight's discussion with George, I'm happy to introduce Rob Walk, who is president of PANIC and my co-host this evening. Rob manages a family office where he focuses on global public and private investments. Previously, he was managing director at the Carlyle Group in Hong Kong and an executive director in the investment banking division of Goldman Sachs in London and Hong Kong. In addition to being the president of PANIC, he's also the founder and co-chair of Princeton Alumni Angels. He currently chairs the board of Amref Health Africa and serves on the boards of the Trinity School in New York City and Volunteers of America, Greater New York. Rob has an AB in political science from Princeton University and an MPhil in international relations from Cambridge University. He's a lifelong New York Yankees fan who fondly remembers watching 4 World Series victories by the Yankees between 1996 and 2000 over breakfast in Hong Kong. So over to you, Rob, to introduce Mr. Will.
Wendy, thank you so much, and good evening to everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. As Wendy said, we are so delighted and grateful to have Mr. Will back again, but this time to focus on something that many of us are very passionate about, baseball and not politics. George Will's newspaper column has been syndicated by the Washington Post since 1974, and it appears twice weekly in newspapers across 47 states and 4 countries. In 1976, he became a regular contributing editor of Newsweek magazine, and in 1977 won a Pulitzer Prize for commentary in his newspaper columns. In June 2019, Mr. Will released his most recent work, The Conservative Sensibility. Altogether, 8 collections of Mr. Will's Newsweek and Washington Post columns have been published, the most recent one being One Man's America, The Pleasures and Provocations of Our Singular Nation. George Will has also published 3 books on political theory: Statecraft as Soulcraft, What Government Does; The New Season, A Spectator's Guide to the 1988 Election; and Restoration, Congress, Term Limits, and the Recovery of Deliberative Democracy. In 1990, George Will published Men at Work, which I actually just reread, which is a wonderful book, The Craft of Baseball, which topped the New York Times bestseller list for 2 months. In 1998, Scribner published Bunts, Curt Flood, Camden Yards, Pete Rose, and Other Reflections on Baseball, a best-selling collection of new and previously published writings by Mr. Will on baseball. Mr. Will's most recent book on baseball is A Nice Little Place on the North Side, Wrigley Field at 100. In July 2000, Mr. Wool was a member of baseball's Blue Ribbon panel examining baseball's economics, and he has been an advisor to Major League Baseball multiple times since then. Mr. Wool was born in Champaign, Illinois, and educated at Trinity College in Hartford, Oxford University, and Princeton University, where he earned his PhD in 1968 and served as a trustee. He was awarded the James Madison Medal from Princeton in 1992, the highest honor a graduate alumni can receive, and lives and works in the Washington, D.C. area. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I wanted to kick off, you basically clearly are passionate about baseball, whether it's the memories of the Cubs doubleheader loss on your wedding date, or the passion and insights that you clearly that you show display in your books and writings. You've said baseball has remained a gift that keeps on giving because it never stops surprising, intriguing, and challenging its attentive fans. You've also said baseball, it is said, is only a game. True. And the Grand Canyon is only a hole in Arizona. Not all holes or games are created equal. So I'd love to kick off tonight. What interests you, inspires you, and has drawn your passion and your focus on baseball?
Well, to be clear, first of all, about how preoccupied I am, my email address is office@baseballhabit.com, because I only write about politics to support my baseball habit. My wedding ring, which I designed myself, has the Major League Baseball logo on it, which gives you some sense of my priorities. Baseball strikes me, and this is the reason I wrote Men at Work long ago, it's the game in which the more you know, the more you enjoy it. You can enjoy football for the sheer violence of it, or the NBA for the sheer balletic athleticism of these extraordinary men. To appreciate baseball, you have to understand the nuance, the strategy, and how painstakingly difficult it is to play, and how much it is a game of failure. It's an axiom of baseball that every team goes to spring training knowing it's going to win 60 games, knowing it's going to lose 60 games. You play the whole season, 162 games, to sort out the middle 42. If a team wins 10 out of 20 games, it's definitionally mediocre. If it wins 11 out of 20 games, it has a pretty good chance of playing in October. So the small things, the small differences make huge differences cumulatively, which is a lesson of baseball, end of life.
Really interesting. By the way, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell everyone in the audience, please put any questions for George Will in the Q&A box in the lower right-hand side of the page, and we'll try to direct them in and work them in through the talk tonight. I guess one thing that became clear when I read Men at Work, and I just want to start with the book for a second and then go to more broad discussions about baseball, is how deeply and nuanced you were able to study four key folks that are, as you say, the critical points of baseball: hitting, Tony Gwynn; pitching, Oral Hershiser; fielding, and really just consistency, Cal Ripken; and managing, Tony La Russa, who's actually back again after retirement. So tell me, what was it that drew you to those four positions and those four players in particular?
Well, I thought that would pretty much box the compass of what baseball is about. Putting the ball in play, catching it, hitting it, and managing, making the strategic decisions during the game. When the White Sox fired their manager a few months ago, my phone immediately lit up because it gets all baseball news instantly. And I instantly texted my friend Tony. I said, you ought to go back to where you started as a manager with the White Sox and win enough games to catch John McGraw and become the second winningest manager of all time. No one's ever going to catch Connie Mack because he managed for 50 years. He was immune to being fired by the owner because he was the owner of the Philadelphia Athletics. And I was very fortunate in that Tony La Russa is extremely thoughtful and was an earlier adopter, as it were, of the analytics. Tony Gwynn, who went on to win 7 batting titles, is probably the best hitter, along with a pure hitter, along with Rod Carew since Ted Williams. Cal Ripken is, I mean, he went through a season, of course, playing every inning of every game, in which he made 3 errors. That's just impossible at shortstop. And he was an impossible shortstop in the sense that it traditionally had been a position played by people named Pee Wee Reese and Scooter Rizzuto and the Blade Mark Belanger, thin, small, non-power hitting, but mobile people. Along came Cal Ripken at 6'3" or 4", whatever he is, more than 200 pounds, a power hitter, who could play the position because he knew the game so well. His father was a minor league and then major league coach and manager. And he was so steeped in baseball that he knew what his pitchers could do and how his pitchers were going to pitch particular hitters, and if the pitcher could execute, where the ball was apt to go. So he was always there. Wayne Gretzky, the great dust hockey player of all time. I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where the puck is going. And that was Ripken's approach to the game. And Hershiser did me the extraordinary, the other 3 are Hall of Famers. Hershiser, who's had a terrific career, did me the favor of having an unbelievable 1988, which was the year I did most of the writing about this. He won the Cy Young Award. He was the MVP of the World Series. He set the major league record of consecutive scoreless innings. So everything worked out in 1988. In fact, Tony Gwynn won the batting title on the last at bat of the 88 season. And he got to first base, which was being played by Will Clark of the Giants, who was the one he beat out for the batting title. And I have a picture in the book of him, I think, shaking hands with Tony Gwynn. The book itself was the second best-selling nonfiction book of that year. It was number 1 on the Times bestseller list for 2 months. It was on the list for 4 months. I've published 15 books, and it's sold more than the other 14 combined, I think, which is a sign of national health.
You know, and it was an amazing year that you picked. I mean, you obviously picked 3 players that were Hall of Famers, but you're right. Orel Hershiser had a 23-8 record, a 2.26 ERA, 59 2/3 scoreless innings, Cy Young, MVP, World Series. But what was interesting in your character studies, I'm thinking of, Cal Ripken and Tony Gwynn. It's not just that people are blessed with physical or athletic skills. It's actually, as you say, a lot of little things, a lot of hard work and dedication and focus and commitment, right? Of devotion to excellence, consistency, whether it's your discussion of how Tony Gwynn talks about how he learns to read a pitcher's delivery, or just Cal Ripken's approach to everything he does. So just talk a little more about how these little things that you may not notice, right? It's not just getting a hit that really make that those small differences that really differentiate great players from good players and help contribute to great teams from good teams.
Let me give you one example. Before Mike Scioscia was the longtime manager of the Angels for 18 seasons, Mike was a catcher for the Dodgers and a good one. Mike used to sit on the bench before the game watching the other team take batting practice. And he would notice if a hitter, when he asked the batting practice pitcher to throw him a curveball, if he changed his feet. So he would know when the batter, when he was behind the plate during the game, was expecting a curveball by the way he put his feet. And of course, he would call something else. These tiny, infinitesimal differences make all the difference in baseball. Tony Gwynn was one of the first to use tape. It sounds ancient history, and indeed it is ancient history, but he used to carry a tape recorder around with him so he could show pictures of the pitchers he was going to face and his prior at-bats. Now, of course, everyone has that on iPads that are permitted in the dugout now. And after the sign stealing scandal of the Astros, restrictions were put on about whether you could go back into the clubhouse and watch videotape of the game. But they are permitted to have their own at-bats. Some players have every at-bat of a season or every at-bat they've ever had against a particular pitcher on an iPad available to them in the dugout. Were they holding their hands quite as high when they were doing well against this man? Were they standing, where were they in the batter's box? But a lot of people, baseball's a game rich in numbers. And I suppose the number most difficult for the average fan to understand is 162. To play 162 games in 183 days is an extraordinary grind. And indeed, grinding is the most frequent used word about what baseball is like. But what players do is work so incredibly hard. People say, hey, gee, they're paid awfully well for 3 hours a day. It's not 3 hours a day. If you have a night game, they're going to be there by 1 o'clock often, working out, working in the cage, watching film. The 3 hours at the end of the day, the actual game is the shank of the day for these people who have put in almost a full day's work before that happens.
So I guess one of the questions, so you wrote the book in 1991, Men at Work, and since then,
90, it came out in 90. And
1990, I apologize.
I wrote it in 88 and 89, yes.
And, a lot has changed in the game of baseball since then. We went through a decade or two of the steroids era. We have seen an explosion of sabermetrics and analytics. And yet I think I read somewhere in one of your interviews that you think the game today is sort of more exciting than it's ever been. Talk about if you would, talk about the changes and how the PED and steroid, crisis and the explosion of analytics has changed the game, and what you like about it today. What are some of the nuances that maybe didn't exist 20 years ago?
I'm actually going to tell you about what I don't like about it today, because what I like about it today is the astonishing athleticism of the players. What I don't like about it is we don't get to see that astonishing athleticism because the ball is so rarely, so infrequently, so episodically put in play. We don't get to see Matt Chapman of the A's and Arenado of the Cardinals and Baez of the Cubs and Lindor of the Mets and all these astonishing people field the ball. It's a simple fact that ball players spend a lot more time with leather on their hands than with wood in their hands. The defense, it's an old saying in baseball that offense wins games and defense wins championships. You can't give a major league team extra outs. 27 is all they should get. You give them extra outs, you're going to lose. Major league teams, even the worst of them, are too good for this. Here's what's happened. After the steroid parenthesis closed, and I think Major League Baseball has pretty much closed it, although there'll be an endless competition between the good chemists and the bad chemists. The bad chemists trying to produce performance-enhancing drugs that the good chemists can't detect. Let's stipulate that that's going to be with us forever, but a combination of testing and draconian punishments has, I think, closed the parenthesis. After that, however, something strange happened. Baseball developed an incredible array using new technologies to measure spin rates of baseballs and all the rest. An astonishing Niagara of data flowed into the game. And it has made, I think, the game worse because everyone's behaving reasonably. That's the paradox as baseball struggles to fix this. Everyone is rationally applying the data. And what's happened is this, the heart of the problem is velocity. Major league pitchers throw so hard now. DeGrom starts off a game throwing 101 miles an hour, and in the 8th inning, he's still doing it. Now, DeGrom is injured as we speak, and that's because of the extraordinary violence of throwing a baseball that hard. But what's happened is that velocity has tended to overwhelm the hitters. So what the hitters have said, if we're going to score runs, what's the best chance? You're going to get 3 singles off DeGrom, or you're going to go up and swing for the fences and hope your bat hits something. And and try and get a home run. So we're stuck now with baseball of the three true outcomes, so-called walk, strikeout, home run. Let me give you an appalling statistic. In April of this year, the first month of this season, there were almost 1,100 more strikeouts than hits. You spend a lot of time at the ballpark watching people walk to the plate, have a protracted at bat, strike out, and walk back to the dugout. The most watched game, the most important game of the 2020 season, the sixth and final game of the World Series between the Rays and the Dodgers. Two teams, 27 outs apiece, 54 outs, exactly half the outs were strikeouts. This is unacceptable. In what I consider the greatest game ever played, the seventh game, this is going to pain you as a Yankee fan, the seventh game of the 1960 World Series, the Pirates beat the Yankees 10-9 in a seventh game with a walk-off home run by Bill Mazeroski. In that game, care to guess the number of strikeouts? 0. No one struck out in a 10-9 game. Now, partly this is because pitchers weren't what they are today. One of the pitchers was Elroy Face. I think he was 5'6". Another was Bobby Shantz. He was 5'7". But even take one of the greatest postseason pitchers of all time, your Yankees, Whitey Ford. Whitey Ford was 5'10". He wouldn't get drafted today, even though he's left-hander. Now, the problem is if guys can throw consistently 98 miles an hour, baseball changes. It used to be, for about 20 years, the secret was run up the count on the pitcher, make the starting pitcher throw, and so you can get him out of the game by say the sixth inning, get into middle relief, which is where mediocrity was supposed to be in baseball, and then you score. The problem is that middle relief now is a whole bullpen full of guys who are 6'5" and they throw 95. It's just not easy anymore. And for that reason, baseball has become dull. So people said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to change our launch angle. We're going to swing up. I'm not trying to put the ball in play, we're trying to put the ball in the bleachers. And as a result, striking out has entirely lost its stigma. Joe DiMaggio had about something like 40 more strikeouts than home runs. There was a time when striking out was considered embarrassing. Now it's just a cost of doing business. And it's slow the game. So the games have become longer. The pace of play has become more rare with the ball put in play almost once every 4 minutes. So as the game gets longer, the pace gets slower, the action gets less. And if you're in the entertainment business, which baseball is, that's a bad combination. So something has to be done about it. Fortunately, Major League Baseball is experimenting in the minor leagues this year with a number of rule changes, which are designed to accommodate this. Other sports have been through this. The NBA changed the configuration of parts of the basketball court because of Wilt Chamberlain. It was just too much. Football is constantly tinkering with the rules to make sure there's more offense and a balance between offense and defense. As a baseball fan, if you will the end, you have to will the means to that end. If you want more action, you have to will certain changes. So baseball is experimenting with moving the mound back 2 feet. It's been 60 feet, 6 inches for more than a century. Well, guys didn't used to be 6'5". They didn't throw 95. So if you don't want velocity to overwhelm the game, if you don't want spin rate to overwhelm the game, if you want the batters to have a chance, by the way, I think your Yankees are batting about 196 at home this year. I think they're batting 248 overall. I mean, we're back to 1968 when they had to lower the mound from 15 inches to 10 inches because pitchers were then still overwhelming the game. So you're going to have to do something about this. And I think the new rules changes, which we can talk about, are certainly worth looking at and probably worth adopting.
Yeah, no, I want to go into more detail, and you raised my next question, which is really some of the trends in baseball So, I read that in 2018 was the first season in baseball where there were more strikeouts than hits. And as of late April this year, only one team in baseball, the Boston Red Sox, actually had more hits than strikeouts. Pitches per game without the ball in play have increased over the last decade from 239 to 259. And we have among the lowest batting averages since World War II. The last couple of years, it's been 245 to 252. So clearly, it's a great game, but there's opportunity. Aside from moving the mound back, what are some of the other rules changes? I know you've advised Major League Baseball and the commissioner on thinking about some things like this over the years. What are some things that baseball is considering that will have the greatest impact, do you think? And given your judgment and your experience as an expert, a fan, someone that's deeply studied the history of the game, what else might or should baseball be thinking about?
Well, first, let's stay with the moving the mound back. Suppose baseball's talking about moving it back a foot. Suppose you moved it back 2 feet. Go back to Whitey Ford, 5 foot 10 inches tall, great pitcher, Hall of Fame pitcher. Where did he release the ball compared to a 6 foot 5 inch pitcher? I'll bet there's about a 2 feet difference. Never mind Randy Johnson, who was 6'10". But a 6 foot 5 pitcher is releasing the ball probably 2 feet closer to the mound, comes out of his hand, than Whitey Ford did. So in a sense, the mound has been moved, the pitching rubber has been moved in 2 feet because of the sheer size of the modern baseball player. Some other rules they're experimenting with to get more action into the game. If a pitcher throws over to first base to hold the runner on base twice, that's fine. If he throws over a third time and does not pick the runner off on the third time, the runner gets a balk and the runner gets to go to second. 10th inning in this season, in an extra inning game, each inning starts with a runner on second base. The problem with home runs is they're not rallies. Home run is a lightning strike. If the excitement lasts 3 seconds, ball up, ball out, yay, next batter. What baseball fans like is rallies, the sense of developing momentum, of keeping the line moving. So you start the 10th inning with an instant rally with a runner in second. I would tweak the rule and say, in fact, reset the lineup. Go back to the leadoff man in the 10th inning. I don't care if you batted in the 9th inning. Go back, start the game over again with the leadoff man. That way, baseball fans watching at home on television can say, hey, I'm going to see Mike Trout in this inning, or I'm going to see Mookie Betts. And they're apt to watch. This matters, by the way, because according to data the commissioner had at least a few years ago, the average baseball fan watching television watches 50 minutes of the game and then turns it off. And by the way, if he's watching 50 minutes, he's in the 3rd inning. We're playing so slowly these days. I hate to keep picking on your Yankees or mentioning your Yankees, but the Yankees in the late 30s, when they were so great, it was called 5 o'clock lightning. They used to start the games at 3 o'clock and end them at about 5 o'clock, 2 hours later. We've extended the time of the game and not packed it with action.
It's very interesting because I know others like Theo Epstein recently said, baseball is the greatest game in the world, but there's some threats because the way the game is evolving. And I take some responsibility for that because the executives like me who spend a lot of time using analytics and other measures to optimize individual and team performance have unwittingly had a negative impact on the aesthetic value and the entertainment value of the game. So have you seen there's been a massive explosion in analytics, sabermetrics, spending on it, the size of staffs at many teams. Have you seen any pullback on that? Or is that just accelerating in trend?
People won't pull back from information. We've got this, A, it's accurate, and B, it's useful, and therefore they're going to use it. Stan Kasten, who's an old friend of mine, is the president of the Dodgers, took me through their analytics department one day in Dodger Stadium. It looked like a major university's physics lab, full of all kinds of blackboards with things written on it that I, of course, couldn't understand. No, I mean, in evaluating talent, this is where this all started in a way with Lewis's book Moneyball about my friend Billy Bean. And what Billy said was, look, we're the Oakland A's, we don't have a lot of money. Therefore, we have to find hidden value. We have to find inefficiencies in the market. And so he began to look at people who could, A, get on base, that being the object of the game, and who could move people who didn't make unnecessary outs. People are always saying, gee, baseball's wonderful, it doesn't have a clock. There's a sense in which baseball does have a clock, and it has 27 ticks. They're outs. You husband your outs carefully, and you do all you can to get the outs from the other side. So you ask, are people going to quit using the data? Never. But you're an economist. Economics is all about the study of incentives. Baseball has to change the incentives. The incentives for uppercut swings, the incentives about putting the ball in play, which brings us to another rule I neglected to mention, and that is about shifts. Watching in the last few weekends, I watched guys hitting rockets, left-handed pull hitters, hitting rockets to right field, where the shortstop turns out is standing, and they're thrown out at first base. So baseball in one of the minor leagues is experimenting with a rule that says all 5 infielders have to start as the pitch is thrown. They have to have their cleats, their spikes on the infield dirt. That's actually a compromise. A hard change would be that they have to have their feet on the infield dirt, and you have to have 2 players on each side of second base, 2 infielders on each side of second base. You know, the shift was really invented by Lou Boudreau in 1948 against Ted Williams. And Ted Williams said, well, they can't put it high enough. Well, that's fine if you're Ted Williams, if you're a genius, but most players aren't like that. And they're clearly suffocating the ability of great players. Now, a lot of people will say, well, why can't they just learn to hit the other way? I'm sympathetic with that. I'd like to have a baseball that was welcoming to Rod Carews, who he didn't care where you put the infielders. He was going to hit them where they ain't. He was like Wee Willie Keeler. He could put the ball anywhere he wanted because the bat was a wand in his hand. But again, most players can't be like that. And therefore, the rules are going to have to be tweaked in order to make sure the ball hits the grass more often than not.
What I think we talked a little bit about, we talked in the prep session a little bit about the sense of competitive balance. I know you served on the Blue Ribbon panel, Baseball Economics, with former Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker, former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, and Yale President Richard Levin. And what's interesting is 5 of the past 6 World Series winners, or 5 of the past World Series winners, have ended droughts of 30 years or more. And the Dodgers are trying to become the first team to win back-to-back World Series since the 1998 to 2000 Yankees. So how does that sense of competitive balance that anyone can win, even smaller teams from smaller markets and smaller budget, play into the baseball myth of opportunity and excitement?
Well, it's a problem. You see, baseball's basic economic model precedes the internet, television, radio, flight, the internal combustion engine. It goes back to the middle of the 19th century, when most revenue was game day revenue from tickets, and the home team got the lion's share of the revenue. The NFL's been entirely different. The NFL was made by Commissioner Pete Rozelle, who made a crucial decision in about 1961 when the big, huge United States had just become a wired nation. Television had exploded from nothing in 1950 to ubiquity in 1960. The NFL was made for television because the action is compact, in many cases fits the television screen. It was made by television, by the great New York Giants, Baltimore Colts playoff game in, I guess, 1958 it was. Roselle made this great decision, which was the lion's share of our revenues are going to come from national television contracts, and we're going to split them up evenly, even shares to every team. That's why a team in a little town in northern Wisconsin called Green Bay can compete with New York and Los Angeles. Baseball's not like that. Baseball gets 40% of its revenues from game day revenues, ticket sales and others, and there are vast disparities here. Furthermore, baseball gets an enormous amount of its revenues from local broadcast contracts. The Yankees have their own network, as do the Cubs, as do the Mets, and as does Nesson of the Red Sox. It's not so easy if you're the Pirates or the Reds or the Royals of Kansas City. So baseball has, from its history, in its basic structure, has an inequality built in that baseball has struggled to address with increasing amounts of revenue sharing, with now what's called a competitive balance tax to penalize particularly teams that go over the payroll threshold for where the tax gets in. It goes over 3 times in a row. The rate is 50%, and that's a serious deterrent. The Players Association might deny this, but baseball has effectively a more or less firm salary cap now, because a lot of teams, even those that don't have to, are trying to stay below the threshold as kind of ethic among the teams. So baseball has a competitive balance problem that is in a way refuted by the Oakland A's. Because, oh, what about the A's? They just keep winning and they don't have these 100 lost seasons as they break down and rebuild. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if Pittsburgh can do that, and Cincinnati and the rest. Baseball knowledge is hard to hoard. It's not just that Michael Lewis wrote Moneyball, but people watch what other people are doing. There are only 30 of these entities, and they figure it out and they emulate them, but not any. For some reason, the Oakland A's under Billy Beane is a black swan event, but it's a black swan event year after year. And unless other teams can figure out a way to replicate this, there is an inherent unfairness in the game that's hard to overcome.
And that makes sense. And you have owners coming into sports, including, if you look at the Premier League soccer, there are some billionaire foreign owners. If you look at Steve Cohen with the Mets, it's really interesting to see what will happen there. Start taking a couple questions working in from the audience. Dick Walker asks, Mr. Will, what's your evening baseball routine? Do you watch one game beginning to end, or use the MLB app to keep your eyes on more than one game at a time?
The latter, more than one game at a time. As I grow older, I find that although I'm a Cub fan and I'm a Washington Nationals season ticket holder, I just like the game itself. There isn't a team out there that doesn't have a really exciting player worth watching. So I've got the MLB app on my phone so I can watch all out-of-market games, which is hard on my sleep with the West Coast games, but I watch them all.
So an interesting question came in. You in your book, and in other places, you've talked about the 3 most important developments in baseball since World War II. Social, so the Jackie Robinson in 1947, legal, the arrival of free agency in 89, and then architectural, starting in 1992, the opening of Camden Yards, following by, I think, 21 new stadiums within the following 20 years. And as you pointed out, baseball is very different. 50% or more fans have attended a game in a ballpark versus 2-3% in the NFL. So questions anonymous attendee asked is, as a historian of baseball, do players play differently in different historic ballparks? Are they inspired by these parks? If so, what are your favorite historic ballparks and why?
Well, there are only two really historic ballparks left, and that's Wrigley Field in Chicago and the Red Sox, 1911, I believe it was. It was the year the Titanic went down. It is the oldest ballpark, Fenway. Uh, of the new ballparks, my favorite is Pittsburgh because it's relatively small scale. It's open. You don't realize Pittsburgh has a skyline until you go to that ballpark and you see it. There are three rivers there at Pittsburgh, and it's a city of bridges, and you see the fans streaming across the Roberto Clemente Bridge. But so many of the ballparks are wonderful. The smallest footprint of a modern ballpark is the San Francisco Giants ballpark. It's on 13.5 acres. But what a place. It's right down along the bay, along Willie McCovey Cove. There aren't any bad ballparks that have been built since the White Sox ballpark, which is probably the last one before we figured out how to do it right with Camden Yards. Tom Boswell, who's just announced his retirement as the great baseball writer for the Washington Post, has made the point that baseball is the most observable of team games. It's 9 people thinly scattered across an eye-pleasing green background. Well, why not have ballparks configured the way they used to be to maximize the ability to watch this? In the 1960s and 70s, when lots of things from men's fashion to politics went nuts, we began to build these multi-purpose stadiums that were supposed to be good for football and baseball and actually were good for neither. And a ball player would come to bat, he couldn't tell whether he was in San Diego or St. Louis or Cincinnati or Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. They all looked alike. And they had too much foul territory, and they were boring, and there were no eccentricities like the Green Monster in Boston. So the question was, do players adapt to these ballparks? You bet they do. I don't believe the Yankee Stadium, the new Yankee Stadium measurements, or what they say are the measurements of that short right field. But obviously players that come in there, even right-handed hitters are aiming for opposite field home runs at that ridiculously short porch in that new ballpark. So yes, they definitely do as hitters, and also as defenders, the outfielders will come out when they're about to start a new series and take fly balls and get used to the configuration of the outfield.
Interesting. Well, one of the counterpoints to the lower batting averages and higher rate of strikeouts and fewer balls in play is actually right now, we may have the deepest collection of young sluggers in the game. And I'm thinking especially at places like shortstop, where we have 6 shortstops with career slugging percentages better than 470 through age 27, Francisco Lindor, Carlos Correa, others. It's an incredible group, especially at that position. So Jeff Judge asked, who do you think the most exciting players in the game are today, and why?
Well, let me start with the obvious. Mike Trout. I once asked Billy Beane, I said, who's the best baseball player you've ever seen? Now, Billy's not effusive. And he looked at me as though I was simple-minded and said, Mike Trout, of course. Trout is in a league of his own. As they used to say in baseball, he should be promoted to a higher league. But leave Trout aside. My idea of the most exciting player I've ever seen is probably Rickey Henderson. I think he led off games 88 times with home runs. He holds, I think, the record for most runs scored. He had obviously he could run the bases, steal bases brilliantly. But today, I think the excitement of watching Nolan Arenado and Matt Chapman play third base, or Lindor and Javi Baez play shortstop. It's players like that that excite me most.
And speaking of Mike Trout, he turns 30 this summer. Since 1969, only Rod Carew totaled a higher, WAR, wins above replacement without a World Series win. Do you think he will get a World Series win?
It doesn't look promising right now. I mean, it's really hard to get to the World Series because even if you win your division or win the playoff, right, you still got another mini season to get through, and it's full of luck and bad bounces. So it's going to be very difficult. Artie Moreno, who owns the Angels, have tried to surround him with offensive talent, Upton and Rendon and these guys, but the problem is always starting pitching. It's always getting 27 outs. And I would not bet my net worth on Trout playing in the World Series this year.
So speaking of World Series, David Bennett asks, what is the best World Series you've watched? And there have been some great ones, so I'm curious about your answer.
Probably the 1991 World Series. It was on my honeymoon. My honeymoon went from Paris to London to Minneapolis to see the Braves Twins World Series. That was where Kirby Trout pocketed a home run to force a Game 7. Got the great call from the broadcaster, Jack Buck, we'll see you tomorrow night. It's hard to top that with Jack Morris going, what, 9, but you'd go 10 innings in Game 7. So I'd say that's probably the favorite of the ones I saw. It's hard to beat the 1960 World Series, where the Yankees outscored the Pirates something like 2-1, but lost the series. There've been a lot of great ones, but those would be my two favorites, I think.
Thank you. Gary King asks, with the advent and expansion of interleague play, what will be the future of differences between the National League and American League, and thus the uniqueness of the World Series, which was among the professional sports championship games? So are the differences, especially if you have a permanent DH rule across baseball, will the differences really fade away between the American League and National League?
I think they've largely faded away. You know, they used to have American League president and the National League president. They're gone. The American League umpires behind the plate used to wear the big sort of mattress chest protectors. They're gone. There were American League umpires and National League umpires. The crews were entirely separate. For that reason, the All-Star game was played with a kind of ferocity. People played to win. And the Mazes and the Musials would get 4 at-bats because they were trying to win. And as a result of this blurring of the differences and the decline of league rivalries, you have a kind of playful family reunion picnic kind of all-star game. It's kind of fun, but it's hard to take seriously. In fact, most people take the home run derby more seriously than the game the next night. No, there's no question, and the questioner is right that once the DH comes in, and I'm afraid that's an accomplished fact, let me put an asterisk over that. It isn't, both the players want it and the owners want it, and it's a measure of how bad the relationship is between the players and the owners, that they both want the same thing and they can't agree on it somehow, which is an amazing, it's the problem of game theory. How do you get that bad? But again, I like the National League game. I like the strategy involved. But if I'm going to say, and I do say ad nauseum, that we need more action in the game, one way to get it is to take the bat out of the hands of pitchers, because they just are not contributing. There are a few Bob Gibsons and the Don Drysdales, and today Max Scherzer are pitchers who can hit. But most people do not go to the ballpark to see, to see pitchers flail away.
Now, a couple of people have asked a very interesting question where people get very worked up on balls and strikes, and some umpires having different strike zones. So a couple of people asked the same question, which is, at some point, should we call balls and strikes electronically?
When the technology is available, and it's not available yet, but probably will be, I expect there will be an automated ball and strike. Now, there are going to be problems. The plate's 17 inches wide, and it's about deep. So if you have an electronic calling of balls and strikes, there are going to be pitches that come in and tip that much of the front edge, the front corner of the plate, and they're going to be called strikes. And you could have a sudden depression of offense because of automated strike calls. You'll still need an umpire behind home plate to call catcher's interference and to call some other matters. But I wouldn't be surprised. Now, the questioner points to this question of different strike zones by different umpires. That was a much bigger problem until a few years ago. It was a big problem when an umpire finally said, after a game in which Glavine of the Braves had been getting these calls, he pitched 6 inches off the plate and kept getting those calls. And an umpire said after one of these games, well, I call my strike zone. And people say, well, wait, hold on, it's defined. It can't be any more basic to the game than the strike zone. It's defined in the rule book, enforce it. So umpires are now graded on every game. Every home plate umpire gets graded on this. There are cameras in the ballparks, and they produce a record of how you're doing, and reports are given. So I think that we've made a lot of progress towards standardizing what Lord knows should be standard. Now, one of the problems with an automated strikes calling of balls and strikes is this: there are batters who change their stance when the strike is when the ball and strike count is different. When Ricky Henderson really wanted to get on base and he crouched over, his strike zone was about the size of this, about the size of a postcard. So what do? Do you adjust the strike zone if the strike on your machine, whatever it is? So, I mean, when I first became a baseball fan, the strike zone was from the knees, not to the belt, not to the midpoint between the belt and the letters, not the letters. It was from the shoulders to the knees. If you've ever seen Ted Williams' famous book, The Science of Hitting, the cover of which is him in the left-hand batter's box, and the batter's box filled with baseballs, showing what he batted when the ball was in a particular place, and the strike zone went from his shoulder to his knees. Now today it's half that size, which is one reason why you have these uppercut swings to get the ball out of the ballpark. I suggested to some of my baseball friends, raise the strike zone, because no one wants to start 0-2 and they'll come up to the plate hacking. The answer is, will you dope, say my friends, Joe Torre and others? If a guy's throwing 98 and he's getting a high strike, no one can get a launch angle on a 98-mile-an-hour fastball up around the shoulders. So that would further depress. Yeah. We always keep coming back to the size of the modern athlete and the speed of the modern pitching. And all reform of baseball starts with those brute facts.
So Jeff Layton asked an interesting question. He said, Jackie Robinson on third and threatening to steal home, the moment I became a baseball lifer. I was wondering if you had such a moment as a child.
Oh gosh, no, remember I was a Cub fan and they were just god awful. They didn't have athletes except for Ernie Banks. So Ernie came up 4 times a game and that was the excitement. I do, much of my joy of baseball was watching Ricky Henderson for all those years, but I don't think I had anything as exciting as a Jackie Robinson, who wherever he was on the field, he just radiated electricity. Willie Mays, 90 years old, 2 days ago, did that. He brought flair, he brought excitement. But I don't have whoever the questioner was who had Jackie Robinson as his epiphany was a lucky man.
Yes. So Rachel Butler asks, why do you think baseball lends itself to so much to superstition? From crazy routines the players go through to the curse of the Bambino.
Well, the curse of the Bambino is just New England angst. It's the self-dramatizing transcendentalists of New England. If I'm offending Red Sox fans, I don't care. For those who are not familiar with it, the so-called curse of the Bambino is that they won the World Series in 1918 and didn't win it again in the 20th century because the gods of baseball or something were punishing them for selling Babe Ruth to the Yankees so that the owner of the Red Sox could finance a play called No No Nanette. The Cubs thought they had a curse of the billy goat because some fool tried to bring a farm animal, a billy goat, into Wrigley Field and was turned away. This is all rubbish. Baseball players, however, are superstitious and are minutely attentive to their routines because, again, 162 games and 183 days, they have to have these routines. They know when they're going to get dressed. They know when they're going to run their sprints. They know when they're going to take batting practice because they can't stand deviations from this. That's why teams that have 3 or 4 different starting times during a year annoy their players. They want to start at one time in day games and one time at night games, period, because there's too much improvising and thought involved otherwise.
So Ashok Subramarian asks, you mentioned Mike Trout and Billy Beane talking about as the best player in baseball. Where would you put him in historical context versus some of the greats of the games? Yeah.
Mike Trout, I would put Mike Trout in the top, certainly 20 position players of all time, probably higher. Babe Ruth, he's in the conversation for best player of all time with Babe Ruth and Willie Mays and Henry Aaron, and then comes Mike Trout. And he's, as you say, he's not yet 30. So Mike Trout, it's going to be really hard to catch Babe Ruth, but my ranking of the greatest players would probably at this point be Ruth, Aaron, Trout, Mays. That's how good he is. Watch him go. I mean, he's like Mickey Mantle. He's got the speed of Mickey Mantle, and he weighs what, 30 or 40 pounds more. Everyone has a hole in their strike zone, but I haven't found Trout's yet.
So Hall of Fame, I was thinking, I was going to ask you about PAD players, and then someone else, Sharon Kidd, wanted to know about Pete Rose, gambling. Should he be in the Hall of Fame? You had I think a quote in a town hall saying Barry Bonds' records must remain part of baseball's history. His hits happened, erase them, and there are discrepancies in baseball's bookkeeping about the records of the pitchers who gave them up. And then George Orwell. So how do you feel about, Barry Bonds and Pete Rose, who obviously have amazing records, but there's some question marks over how they got the records or how they character related questions. How do you, what's your thinking behind that?
Well, Rose presents a very different problem. Rose committed the scarlet sin in baseball, and that is gambling. Rose walked by, every clubhouse has a bulletin board, and on that bulletin board, there are basic rules of baseball, and in boldface in every clubhouse, and Pete Rose walked by one 25,000 times easily. It says if you gamble on baseball, you will be permanently disqualified. He gambled on baseball. This is not, and then he lied about it until he confessed about it in an autobiography that he, I think, was surprised when he read his autobiography that he'd actually confessed to it. Look, there's no question that Pete Rose is a Hall of Fame player and a lout in almost every aspect of his character. He was just a terrible person. Well, Tris Speaker was no charmer, and Babe Ruth had his problems, and the Hall of Fame has to decide whether it's a shrine or a museum. We always talk about so-and-so is enshrined in the Hall of Fame. And the Hall of Fame voter, when he gets his ballot, says you're supposed to consider achievements including sportsmanship and the integrity of the game. Well, it's hard to now I'm transitioning here to Barry Bonds and others. It's hard to take seriously what they did because that was better baseball through chemistry. It's hard to take seriously Bonds' achievements. And the tragedy is Bonds, before he took his first PED, was a Hall of Fame player. He was a first ballot Hall of Famer. He didn't need to do this. And by devaluing, as he does, the baseball statistics, he strikes at the very heart of the appeal of baseball to its fans. Let me say more about that. Because baseball is not a game of flow like soccer or hockey, it's a game of episodes. Strike one, strike two, ball one, first out, second out. It produces this enormous, ever-thickening sediment of numbers that enables us to make meaningful intergenerational comparisons of players. Walter Johnson and Randy Johnson, Lefty Grove and Greg Maddux. It's hard because baseball has one disjunction, the dead ball issue and the lively ball issue that began in 1920. But absent that, it's pretty much the same game. So the statistics are part of the great conversation of baseball. And Bart Giamatti, the former Yale classicist or literature professor who became first president of the American League and then the commissioner of baseball, Bart Giamatti said, baseball is, in a sense, the conversation about baseball. Bruce Catton, the great Civil War historian, said that baseball is the greatest conversation topic ever invented in the United States. And it's because the numbers are meaningful. Well, what made the PED eruption so awful is it made the numbers not meaningful. And one of the reasons, by the way, that there was such an outpouring of affection for Henry Aaron when he died was he did it without chemistry. And it was so much appreciated coming as it did after the closure of the PED parenthesis. So we have to, if baseball is, if the Hall of Fame is a museum, then I suppose you put Barry Bonds in and you put it on his plaque. But it's not just a museum, not in the eyes of not in its own bylaws and not in the eyes of a lot of baseball fans who consider it a shrine, who think that character has something to do with it. Now, again, you do not want to turn the Hall of Fame into a moral health resort. There's no telling how many more home runs Babe Ruth would have hit if he'd gone to bed a little earlier and a little more often with Mrs. Ruth. He was a live wire, and but we don't care about Babe Ruth's off the field antics. We don't care that Ty Cobb was a racist, not as bad as Tris Speaker, who was a great big fan, as I understand it, of the Ku Klux Klan. We've decided not to get into that, and I think that's probably healthy. But what Barry Bonds did went not to just his private character, he went to the integrity of the competition, which is everything. And that's why I would not vote to put him in the Hall of Fame. And by the way, one of the reasons I think he will not be in the Hall of Fame is that an enormous number of Hall of Fame ball players, Mike Schmidt and others, said they're not coming back to Cooperstown if the PED players are in.
Really interesting. Mark Fisher asked a question. He said, you mentioned the lows to which American society fell in the 60s in fields as disparate as stadium architecture and men's fashion. Are you more despairing about the state of baseball and American society in the current time or back in the 60s?
Well, I'm not I'll leave American society out. This is a politics-free zone here tonight. But baseball, I'm not as upset about because baseball knows what the problem is. As I said, it's everyone behaving reasonably on the basis of the incentive structure that exists. Baseball is going to fix itself. The fact that it is something as tradition-oriented as baseball is contemplating moving the pitcher's mound is a very good sign of seriousness. Again, if you will the end, you have to will the means to the end, and the means means more offense. So I don't despair about baseball at all. It drives me crazy. When we're done here tonight, I'm going to turn on baseball games, and I'm going to see too many strikeouts, and I'm going to see guys stepping out of the batter's box. By the way, there is a rule that once you're in the batter's box, you're supposed to stay there, enforce it. And that would speed the game up wonderfully. Ban batting gloves. That's my half facetious, but only half facetious recommended. The guys get in the batter's box, they swing or they don't swing. They take a pitch and then they step out and adjust their batting gloves. Ty Cobb never wore a batting glove. Joe DiMaggio never wore a batting glove. Willie Mays never wore a batting glove. Batting gloves are a recent thing. Ban the damn things if people can't quit fidgeting with them.
So John Shu asked an interesting question. He said, how well do you believe baseball reflects the American male psyche? Fair play, decency, Walter Johnson, cheating, spitball, sign stealing, win at cost, Cobb.
Well, there are lots of American psyches, male and female. And clearly we have the full gamut of American character traits from, as you say, Ty Cobb, who thought nothing was forbidden, to Stan Musial, who was a perfect gentleman. Baseball gives ample opportunity for people to reveal themselves. It's been well said that sports do not just build character, they reveal it. And we've got the full gamut of human virtues and vices on display in baseball history.
A number of people ask questions on the pace of play, and you mentioned some of the modifications, but clearly that's a big concern. And sometimes the rules can actually be counterproductive in some cases, or have unanticipated consequences, like the three batter rule we talked about earlier. When Cardinals left-hander Genesis Cabrera hit Bryce Harper in the face and then Didi Gregorius in the back, the Cardinals manager couldn't pull him out, right? So even the best intentioned things have unanticipated consequences. But what would you recommend for speeding up the pace of play?
Well, first of all, I just mentioned one, which would be having the batters stay in the batter's box, unless they hit a foul off a pitch and then want to step out. I think a pitch clock is coming. They're talking about a 20-second pitch clock. I'd make it 15. I would shorten the time between innings, by the way, that's not the pace of play, but it's the pace of game. It'll cost the owners some money, and between innings advertising, so be it. We're trying to improve their entertainment product. But most of all, we want, if by moving the mound back, you can give the batter just a little more edge to put the ball in play, I would do that. I wish we had somewhat bigger ballparks, that is more playing field, more like the old Busch Stadium in St. Louis and Kansas City Royal Stadium today, because triples are fun. And in order to hit a triple, it helps to have a bigger ballpark. So things like that, pitch clock, stay in the batter's box, do something to ameliorate the problem of overwhelming velocity. And you'll see I mean, these guys are such stupendous athletes. Let me tell you a story. When they first opened Comerica Park, the new ballpark back then in Detroit, I went to a game there, and a guy named Garner was their manager. And Garner said, "George, come here, I'm going to show you something." He took me down under the stands they had a pitching machine. All ballparks have pitching machines under their stands where the guys can work out before the game and between innings or waiting to pinch hit. But the Tigers had a pitching machine that could throw a tennis ball 115 miles an hour. And the tennis balls had numbers written on them. And Garner said, a major league hitter can read the number at 115 miles an hour, which is why they're major league hitters, and I'm a political columnist, is that life is unfair in the allocation of talents. When Ted Williams reported at Pensacola, Florida for Marine flight training, they gave him the doctor there gave him an eye exam and left the room and went and got all the other doctors to come in and said, "You've never seen anything like this guy's eyesight." So life is unfair, and get over it.
So a couple people have actually asked about how do you attract youth to baseball? It seems like these days more youth are attracted to basketball, increasingly to soccer and other games. Howard Bloom asked a question: any thoughts on the sadly diminished role of baseball in youth sports? I'm still friends with kids I played Little League with decades ago, and it seems like there are fewer kids involved now.
Yeah, the best predictor of becoming a baseball fan, we know this from ample research in Major League Baseball, the best predictor is to have played baseball. Hence the ads you see on a lot of Major League Baseball broadcasts about play, and here, go to this website, we'll help you figure out how to do this. Get people out to play. There's no question that baseball is losing a large number of its better athletes to games with more action. I don't know how it is where you live, but in the Washington area, a lot of the better athletes are playing lacrosse in the spring rather than baseball, or in the fall, whenever the season is. So that's part of it. It's also the case that if you're a terrific young athlete, you say, look, I can become a football player and go to Ohio State, and from Ohio State to the big league, to the NFL, or I can become a baseball player. And I can, if I go to college, I'm going to play in front of 800 people, maybe on a good day. And I'll play 4 years, at which point I'll then go to the minor leagues, go to Bluefield, West Virginia, and eat at Arby's and live in the Days Inn. And in 3 or 4 years, maybe get to the big leagues. It's hard to cure that. I mean, the NFL has this advantage that Alabama and LSU and Michigan and Ohio State produce their talent free. The taxpayers pay for it. Major League Baseball has to produce this talent, and learning to hit a moving, curving 95-mile-an-hour baseball with a round bat is hard. It takes a lot of apprenticeship in the minor leagues, which discourages some young people. But this problem is compounded with the problem that Major League Baseball now does not have nearly enough African-American players. And there's a reason for that, a number of reasons. One is this. Youth baseball now is given over to what are called travel teams. They find rising young talent and they join travel teams, which travel. And it's expensive and it takes time from parents. And if you're a working class parent, it's hard to afford. So African-American young people are sometimes shut out of baseball at that place where baseball talent begins its gestation.
Can I also ask about diversity among the management ranks? So Kim Eng, after many years, is finally a general manager, first female general manager in baseball. There don't seem to be a lot of diversity in terms of general managers to some degree coaches or managers, but I'm just curious as to whether you see that changing, or is there progress being made, or is it really slow because it doesn't appear to be transformational?
Well, I don't think it's transformational yet, but progress is being made. Here's the good news. If you convinced a major league team, a major league ownership, that having a zebra as manager would win them 2 extra games a year, they'd hire the zebra. I mean, Major League Baseball is really serious about winning games. They know that the difference between 97 wins and 93 wins is often millions of dollars. And besides, money aside, money's never aside, but money aside, everyone in Major League Baseball is intensely competitive. That's why they got there. It's a very steep pyramid getting to the top of that sport, and they want to win. So you see, there's really no problem being a Dusty Baker or Dave Roberts or Cora. I think minority managers coming from the ranks of players have no problem now being interviewed for and landing managing jobs in uniform. The front office is a little different because a lot of those guys are from Dartmouth and Princeton and Amherst. They're really seriously bad baseball players who are really good at calculus and who took their statistical interests and their mathematical abilities into baseball because they're fans. Getting diversity there may be a different kind of problem.
A great question from Davis. Aside from your books, which baseball writers do you admire most? And are there any books that really stand out that you would recommend to others?
Well, the writers I admire most are Tom Boswell, who has a bunch of collections, and Roger Angell of the New Yorker for years and years. He's produced, if you can find, I don't know if they're still in print. If not, the internet will find them for you in used bookstores. Get every collection Roger Angell ever published, because they're models. Today, we have wonderful baseball writers. Tim Kirkshin, Joe Posnanski, Jason Stark. I read absolutely everything that Tom Verducci writes about baseball because he's got the numbers. He's a tireless advocate of reforms of baseball to make some of these numbers go away, like the strikeouts. It's a golden age of baseball writing as well as baseball talent. So if I had to start with one, I'd start with Tom Verducci.
That's great. So a number of people have asked about the economics of baseball. Obviously, you've got a big negotiation coming up about the collective bargaining agreement, but people ask about questions about younger talent, really good talent being underpaid structurally, and that's having the impact of, forcing, more talented people at older ages out earlier than before because of the economics. You can get young talent at much lower rates than a veteran. Is there any way to address these? Does this inequality or imbalance need to be addressed somewhat?
I think it can be addressed. The structure of baseball is that you're often paying for what the player has done, not for what he's going to do for you. The answer to that is to lower the age at which you're eligible for free agency or for arbitration, so that you get guys guys like Chris Bryant of the Cubs, Acuna of the Braves, Soto of the Nationals. Pay them early and pay them well. Have a much more open free market in talent. One thing that I'm absolutely certain the new collective bargaining agreement will do away with is the ability to keep a promising player in the minor leagues for the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, so that his service time clock starts a year later, and the team gets extra year of control over him. That's got to go, and will, I think. But baseball's got to leave aside the pandemic, which is horrible because baseball, as I said earlier, gets 40% of its revenues from game day revenues, and not having people in the stands is just devastating. But once we get back to people in the stands and drinking beer and buying hot dogs and parking their cars and buying jerseys, baseball will have enough money to keep people happy. That doesn't mean the Players Association and MLB aren't going to fight. It's in they have a metabolic urge to fight in baseball. But we haven't had a work stoppage since 1994, the year they lost the World Series to a work stoppage. I think it's possible there could be a work stoppage, and that would in 2022, and that would be a calamity for baseball. Here's why. When I was young, when the world and I were young, in the 50s and 60s, Major League Baseball had the sports fans' nearly undivided attention from the 1st of April until Ohio State played Michigan. That's not true anymore. Today, there are now 7 weeks between the last NBA championship game and the first NFL preseason game. The competition for the sports dollar, the eyes and the interest of the sports fan is much more intense than it used to be, and baseball has to understand that. That's why it has to become more entertaining. That's why it has to realize it's competing with other serious, growing, improvising, innovating sports in the NFL and the NBA.
Sharon Keld asked a question about the Chicago Cubs, who I know you love so much. And she said, I lived in Chicago for many years, and I always felt the Cubs made just enough deals to create the illusion of competitiveness rather than spend enough money to actually win. Fans would be happy with just the illusion. What do you think?
Well, I think she's right that for many years, particularly under the Wrigleys and under the Tribune Company, the Cubs were not seriously trying to win. Wrigley didn't, Phil Wrigley, the ballpark's named after his father, William Wrigley, but Phil Wrigley didn't much care for baseball. In fact, he said, let's sell Wrigley Field as the experience and not winning. Who cares what's on the scoreboard? The grass is green, the ivy's lush, the beer is cold. Who cares about the quality of the product? Well, it turns out the fans did. And then the Tribune Company bought the Cubs. And in buying the Cubs, they bought programming for a superstation. Didn't matter if the Cubs were all that good. They filled time on WGN Superstation. Well, along came the Ricketts family, thank God. And Tom Ricketts, who met his wife in the Wrigley Field bleachers, is a serious baseball fan and a serious longtime Cub fan. And the Cubs now have their own network, and they are Wrigley Field is a destination for visitors to Illinois, and the Cubs are maximizing their revenues and are good and are going to stay good.
So, someone asked about the recent, there have been a lot of contracts recently issued that are 10-year contracts given out to great players. Fernando Tatis, Mookie Betts, Bryce Harper, Mike Trout. Obviously, many of these are leading players in baseball, but do 10-year contracts really make sense for the teams, particularly given what you said, that people are paid for what they've done in the past, often more than what they'll produce in the future?
I'll tell you when a long-term contract doesn't make sense is when you give it to Pujols after he's had obviously his 10 greatest years in St. Louis, and then you bring in Anaheim with 10 more years on your tab. I can see you make the case that you want to attach your fans to a franchise, the face of the franchise, like Fernando Tatis, we hope, such as Mike Trout and others. So it makes baseball and commercial sense to have an extraordinarily popular player who's not going anywhere. It would have been nice it would be nice if baseball could figure some financial arrangements that would make it easier for a team to designate a particular player, such as Lindor was with the Indians, and help the Indians keep him. because if you're an Indians fan and you get a great player like that and you know he's leaving sooner rather than later, it obviously conditions your loyalty to the team. But some of these, I can understand locking up a really great talent early for baseball reasons, that is on the field, and for relations with the fans.
Just two more questions. The first question is, if you were to write Men at Work today, or a similar version, who would you pick? Who would you want to study and spend a year with? Hitter, batter, fielder, and manager?
Oh, goodness. My manager would probably be, well, let me think about that for a minute. My pitcher, well, the most interesting personality is Bauer, but I'm not sure that he wears well. A year's exposure to Bauer might be a bit much. I think probably DeGrom would be my pitcher. He's a breathtaking talent, and he's thoughtful also. I'd probably, as a fielder, would probably pick a catcher. It's probably a little late in the game to pick Yadier Molina, the only catcher in baseball history who's caught 2,000 games with the same team. But I'd find a catcher, probably JT Realmuto would be my fielder. I'd pick a catcher with the Philly. My hitter, I wouldn't pick Trout because that's too easy. He's you know, I'd pick a mortal. And I'm not sure, it might be Mookie Betts, because there's something about a 5'9.5" or whatever he is player. Bill Veeck once said, the nice thing about baseball is you don't have to be 7 feet tall or 7 feet wide, and Mookie Betts fits that. And back to my manager, I'd think certainly the best company is Joe Madden of the Angels, who's funny and accomplished, and he's managed in very different settings. He's managed the Tampa Bay Rays, he's managed the Cubs, and he's now managing the Angels. And he's good conversation.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And just to close, you know, you obviously are in love with the game and deeply knowledgeable about the game and some of the changes and challenges and opportunities. Where would you, if you were looking forward 10 years, where would you think baseball would be going, and some of the things that we might or might not expect that would develop in this great game?
Well, first, I think you're going to see some rules changes, pitch clock, perhaps moving the mound back, keep the rule of starting extra innings with a runner on second, things to pick up the pace of play. I think you'll probably be able to go to see a major league game 10 years from now in Nashville, Tennessee, and in Montreal. I think what the commissioner really wants is a 32 games, 32 team Major League Baseball with 8 4-team divisions, so that you have a little more excitement and a little more mobility from fourth to first. I hope they don't go to regional arrangements. I want the Cubs to play Cincinnati, and I want certain old, ancient, 100-year-old rivalries to stay where they are. But I think you'll see, as I say, 32 teams and a lot more action. And with a lot more action, I think you'll see under new collective bargaining, I think you'll see young players getting paid earlier, and therefore baseball getting a larger share of the extraordinary athletic talent that this country and the nations to the south of us, particularly the Dominican Republic, will keep sending this talent to Major League Baseball.
Thank you. I just want to, on behalf of the Princeton Association of New York City and our co-host, the Princeton Club of New York, we first wanted to thank everyone for joining us and taking the time out of your schedule to join us tonight. But most importantly, Mr. Roll, we want to thank you. This is the second time we've been able to host you, and it's been wonderful to hear your insights, to hear your perspective and your deep knowledge of the game, where it's been and where it's going. So we are incredibly grateful to you. I can say Mr. Will's book was fascinating and really insightful, and reminded me of what I loved about baseball when I was growing up. So thank you for joining us today. I know last week was a special birthday week and you're very busy, so we really appreciate your time and your thoughts. And it's also wonderful to have an hour and a half and not talk about politics.
Yes, indeed. I will travel far and stay up late to avoid talking politics and to enjoy talking baseball. So we can do this again at the end of the season.
So very last, not really a question, but who do you think will win the World Series? Who's your pick?
Oh, look, as Billy Beane says, the postseason is a crapshoot. So much happens in such a short span of time. The Dodgers looked a lot better 3 weeks ago than they do now. People get hurt. DeGrom is I certainly hope not seriously injured. But injuries matter in baseball. Look at Yelich on the Brewers is having trouble getting on the field. It'd be kind of politically interesting for the Braves to get to the World Series, because the commissioner, having taken the All-Star game away from Atlanta, would have to go to Atlanta. So that would have its amusing aspects. If I had to pick one team getting there, let me think for just a moment. Well, let me put it this way. When, as I said, when the minute the White Sox fired their manager, and I texted my friend La Russa, I said, get back into baseball. He texted me back immediately. He said, would you be my bench coach? And I said, yeah, 6,000 columns is enough. I'll be your bench coach. So I'm going to tell you, I think my sentimental choice this year, if the Cubs can't make it and if the Nats can't make it, I'd like to see the White Sox in the World Series and to win.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed. That would be.
I just turned, you delicately hit it, I just turned 80. So I'm a little irritated with people saying Tony La Russa at age, what is he, 75, 76 is too old. This ageism must stop.
How many games is he away from moving into second place?
Oh, less than 100, I think.
Wonderful. Well, George, thank you very much. It is a pleasure and honor to have you with us and for sharing your passion and insights. Thanks, Wendy, for being a great partner here, and to everyone else for joining. And now we can go and watch some baseball.
That's where I'm going. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Good night.